Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and it is day 3 of Patron Appreciation Month. There's some folks out there that stumble across one of my videos and they might like it, so they might click like. There's another few out there that might see one or two of my videos, tend to like the pattern, the style, and so forth, and click subscribe. But then there's some folks that abandon all reason and sense and decide to go ahead and click that Patreon link in the description. And, well, for those folks, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit special. So, Patron Appreciation Month, I queried each of them and asked them, what is the movie that you want me to watch and review? And today's selection is brought to us by my supporter, Shaun from Nocturnal Horrors. Shaun, thank you so much for suggesting the 1989 movie, Little Monsters. So I'll be discussing and scoring this movie in the normal spoiler-free way, but at some point I will cut over to a spoiler-filled discussion to give it a full movie review. So here's a little bit of a quandary. I read a report recently that although the realm of horror is picking up and the audience is growing and more movies are being made, we're also getting fewer and fewer teenage audience members. We're getting fewer teenagers that are coming out and saying that they love the horror genre. And that used to be one of the key demographics that it catered to. So what's going on? Now, this is purely speculation on my part, but it's just my opinion that although we are extremely fortunate to have movies come out that are slow burn thrillers that really stab us in the guts and pull those guts out with twists and reveals and really difficult character studies that are very well paced over the course of an entire 2-hour-long film, we aren't having quite as many just slash 'em up fun movies anymore. Or at the very least, not ones that are specifically targeted towards teen and late teen audiences. And I'm not talking about PG-13. It can be rated R, that's fine. We all know that they find a way to watch it anyway, as long as it seems to appeal to them. And with the litany of slow burn cerebral horror out there, we just don't quite have the amount of slash 'em up, hack 'em up fun fest that we used to. Additionally, I also think that there's a bit of a problem in that children's movies are afraid to go down the same path and introduce kids to the world of horror in a way that we used to have. Not to be an old internet grandpa here, but we did have movies that really challenged us, while at the same time were designed for us as kids, not necessarily even teenagers, maybe preteens, but even kids. And they weren't afraid to really scare the pants off of us in a safe and juvenile, fun manner. Little Monsters is a fantastic representation of the world that we grew up in that allowed us to have baby steps into the world of horror that grew into the passion that we now have. Now, that being said, I will admit that I haven't seen this movie since I was of the targeted age group, and I didn't really remember a whole lot of it. I did remember that it had Fred Savage. I loved him as I was growing up, you know, the wizard and all that. And Howie Mandel. I remember Howie Mandel from Bobby's World and so forth. So I remembered his performance in this as one that I liked. I didn't quite remember any specifics about it, but I generally remembered that I liked it. So this was a real treat for me to go back and watch as an adult. And it really was a little bit surprising to me how, well, difficult some of the material actually is in this movie. So in this film, we have Fred Savage playing the character of Brian, who, after moving towns and moving into a new house with his brother and his parents, is feeling a bit isolated, feeling a bit like a loner.
I'm sorry we moved.
I hate it here.
Guess you miss your friends, huh?
And soon finds himself in the company of his new friend, Maurice, who is a monster that comes out from under the bed. Brian uses his intellect and a little bit of cunning to trap Maurice as he kind of suspects that there's a monster running amok and causing havoc in his life. And sure enough, there was, and they soon hit it off as friends. And Brian goes and visits the realm of monsters underneath the bed and so forth. And although this movie sounds a bit fantastical, and it is, it's also not afraid to go down some pretty challenging routes. This film deals with pretty tough issues such as fractured friendships, fractured marriages up to and discussing divorce, the nature of getting other people into trouble purposefully and with glee, and dealing with the consequences of that, and the concept of the fantasy of living in a consequence-free, parent-free world. Now, this film was an interesting one for me to watch now as an adult, as somebody that has been in a parental role, because it really does take a certain amount of glee in the notion of being a monster and causing havoc and getting people into trouble purposefully. It shares a lot of similarities to Monsters Incorporated, where instead of coming up from the closet, they come up from under the beds of children around the world. And instead of trying to make them scared, they're instead trying to just basically break shit and pin it on the kids. I mean, if you've ever remembered when you were a kid and things just happened to magically disappear or break, well, this kind of explains it. But being in the role of an adult now, watching this happen, as it's almost glorified in this level of destruction, it was tough to watch while kind of interpreting it with that level of glorification. But the movie soon did kind of redeem itself by showing that although you can try and live a consequence-free life, it really doesn't amount to that there's always consequences. And just because you don't happen to know this person, somebody does. Somebody does love them. And it does tend to hit home when those bad things happen to somebody that you love, that you know, and maybe it causes some reflection and some thinking about your actions. And this movie did have that follow through. If this was strictly consequence-free mayhem, I would have had a bit more trouble with it. But as it was, I think that the message came through. It didn't necessarily beat us over the brow with morality tales, but at the very least it did show that actions have consequences. So that I did like. And from a kid's point of view, this was a whole lot of fun, but at the same time, there also were some visual elements that were pretty challenging and really did kind of slide into that next rung of horror that I think would definitely scare some younger viewers, which is fine. I think that that's an important aspect of childhood, to be scared in a way that's safe, that you can discuss with them as parents to your kids and just generally talk about the nature of fiction and reality and teach those life lessons, and that maybe sometimes being scared in a way that's safe with family members doesn't have to be stuff of nightmares. It can be kind of thrilling. It can be kind of fun. And maybe it's just that next thing that can bring a family a little bit closer through conversational skill and conquering some difficult emotions. So at this point, I'm going to go and throw out the scores. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. I really enjoyed this movie. I'm not going to lie. I remembered enjoying it when I was a kid, and I enjoyed it just as much, if not more so, now. It's a classic, and it's a classic for a reason. Is it for everybody? No. There are going to be kids that are too young for this. There are going to be kids that maybe it just doesn't follow under an age bracket. It just comes down to their personal sensibilities, and it's going to be a little bit too much for them. That's fine. That's part of the experience of finding out your limits by testing them. But beyond that, I think that it was well written. It was well acted. The technical abilities of it were just incredible. The set design alone was fantastic. And some of the practical effects, like I said, it was pretty scary. Even for me watching it now, I was kind of thinking to myself, wow, that's a little bit much, especially for a kid's movie. But hey, it worked. It did pull it off pretty well. And I want to give a little bit of a bigger shout out to Howie Mandel for his performance as Maurice as well. He brought a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm to the role, and also knowing how uncomfortable he was throughout the entirety of the shoot, knowing that he has OCD, knowing that he has ADHD, and knowing how the concept of sitting in a chair and having makeup and prosthetics and latex applied over the course of hours and hours before and after each day of shooting must have been a special place in hell for him. But he pulled it off, consummate professional, hats off to him for this. Okay, so I think that'll about wrap up the spoiler-free portion of this. If you haven't seen the movie yet, or if you care about spoilers, go ahead and stop the video now. All right, so let's go ahead and get into some spoiler talk. Specifically the very end, which is one of the things that I really liked about this movie. The notion of the lore that they had built about you can't stay past sunrise or you'll be trapped down there and you'll become a monster forever. I thought it was good. I think it was an interesting point of view from the point of view of having consequences. And that's one of the major elements of this movie is the notion of consequences, and actions have consequences. So, you could spend the night. You could stay down there, but it would be forever. So when they do actually get trapped and the portal up to the bed did close, that was a bit of a gut punch. I really did forget what happened after that. So the resolution to things was a little bit of a surprise, how they jumped time zones. It was, I don't know, maybe I didn't forget it. It was just the first thought that popped into my head. It seemed a little silly at the time, but I was like, okay, well, what about, Chicago? And sure enough, that's the path they went down. So I don't know if it was just my next logical leap, following in step with the writers, or if it was just something that was a residual part of a childhood memory. But regardless, they did start hopping time zones, and that was an interesting point of view in that they finally landed in Malibu and called their parents. And at this point, I'm thinking they've been gone for a grand total of, overnight. So just from the perspective of not wanting to get into trouble and so on and so forth, or having to explain their actions and be called liars because, of course, it's a kids' movie. Nobody ever believes the kids. How would this possibly get explained? The only real way that they could have pulled that off is by plane, and, how could they have pulled that off? It's an interesting concept to think of, just kind of generally where that would logically wind up at some point. And then, I don't know, this is just kind of the way my brain works is, okay, so they're on the phone with the parents, okay, Malibu, even shelving aside, how and the why and so forth. Well, let's deal with the what and get them home. How? I'm just kind of, I don't know. This is just a weird little thought experiment that I had kind of rattling around in my brain. Do they find themselves going to the nearest police station and sitting tight for 2 days while somebody shows up? Or, how does this really get resolved? I would have liked to have at least picked the writer's brain and find out what they would have done in this situation if the end credits had continued on, if maybe it was scrolling and had a little picture-in-picture thing and we actually saw them making the journey home. I don't know. I was just curious about it. The only other thing that I really want to discuss is Rick Ducommun. How has Rick Ducommun not been in more? He was great in this. He played Snick, the big evil monster and so forth that was kind of the henchman of the boy. He was the father in Scary Movie, and he played just one of the most iconic roles in The Burbs. If we're talking about the neighbor character of Art. If we're talking about an ensemble cast, he's just generally kind of a very inexperienced comedic actor that stood toe-to-toe with the likes of Tom Hanks and Bruce Dern and Corey Feldman and still managed to really deliver a fantastic performance in that. I'm genuinely surprised that Rick has not made it bigger, that he did not get more roles. I don't know. That's just kind of one of my little weird thoughts there. So I think that should about wrap this up. I thank you for joining me here today, and thank you to Shaun at Nocturnal Horrors for suggesting the 1989 movie Little Monsters. If you like this, please click like and subscribe. If you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.